I'm very happy to be here with you today. I will be your moderator for this session. My name is Jérôme Avaux. I'm French, as you would probably have guessed with my accent, and I'm based near Paris. I'm working as a risk manager for Faurecia. So for those of you who don't know Faurecia, it's a global leader in automotive technology. So basically we provide parts for automotives, and we are operating in 37 countries with around 250 plants in the world and more than 2,500 suppliers. So today, as you know, we are going to talk to you about supply chain and more specifically how the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way we need to manage and assess risk related with the supply chain. When I've been given the opportunity to moderate this session a few months ago, I did not hesitate for a second because as a risk manager, I did face a lot of challenges on this supply chain topic during this crisis. And by the way, we are still facing challenges. To be honest with you, despite the fact that we had in the past a few weak signals, for instance, I'm thinking about the SRAS crisis in 2003, but also the H1N1 crisis in 2009, this risk, the global pandemic risk and the impact associated with this risk was totally underestimated, at least in my organization, but I guess I'm not the only one in this case. So for sure, we had that risk identified somewhere in our risk universe, in our matrix, with a very low probability and a medium impact, but nothing we were really focusing on so far. We had much other priorities. And the fact that this single event has totally boosted the probability of many other risks that were, in this case, totally identified is really a unique event. I'm thinking, for instance, about other risks such as supply chain that we are going to discuss today, but also cybersecurity, safety of people at work, liquidity, talent acquisition, but also all the geopolitical aspects. And the thing is that also this crisis was the first one with such a high magnitude. I'm really sorry to say that we will for sure face this kind of crisis again. Maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, but we don't know when, but it will happen again. So it might not be a pandemic again, maybe it will be a cyber war, maybe major floods due to climate change, maybe more geopolitical issue, or maybe a combination of those. So we need to be prepared and we need to be better prepared than what we were at the beginning of this crisis. This is clearly the purpose of the session today. So now I have the pleasure to introduce you with our two great speakers. Let me first introduce you Federica. So Federica, you are an independent consultant based in Italy, in Milano, if I'm right. You are certified in risk management, but also in business continuity, and you regularly provide consultancy services in those fields. And you are very active in promoting and developing the culture of resilience, which is really a key word in this context, in various institutions and universities. You are also, among many other things, a board member of the Italian BCI, the Business Continuity Institute, and you also have published several articles on business continuity and risk management topic. So Federica, thanks for being with us today. Pascal, thanks also for being with us today. So Pascal, you're based in Switzerland, Zurich, and you work for AXA XL since 13 years. AXA XL is the global business unit of AXA Group, in charge of ensuring large multinational accounts and offering also global insurance program. The business unit also offers consulting services that you are part of, which is named XL Risk Consulting. The interesting fun fact about you, Pascal, is that you have been trained as an officer in the Swiss Army regarding logistic security. And honestly, we can imagine how logistic security topic is quite important in the Army. Finally, you are also an active member of the Transported Asset Protection Association, the TAPA, and you are also a certified physical security professional. So Pascal, thanks a lot for being here with us, and thanks a lot for sharing your experience with us today. So during this session, Federica will first start by introducing to you the traditional way of assessing the supply chain risk and the BCP, the Business Continuity Plan. We will see how risk management and business continuity approach can be combined to maximize the value of each. And Federica will also present to you the measures that you can put in place to mitigate those risks. Pascal will also explain to you how we can make the link between business interruption and risk transfer. And typically, he will start by presenting you the story of the COVID-19 crisis, and he will also finish by presenting you what are the lessons learned by this crisis. Just after that, we will review a business scenario that will provide you a very concrete example of how this kind of situation can be dealt with. And during this scenario, you will have the opportunity to ask a few questions that we will then comment with you. So Federica, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Jerome, for introducing me, and a special thanks to Ara and Ferma to give me the possibility to take part to this important event. As you all know, we are in this so-called VUCA world, a world characterized by vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Organizations are reinventing their supply chain since COVID-19 revealed their vulnerability. We know that our world is a riskier place now with the COVID and with all the other risks emerging from this crisis scenario. And organization needs to put in place the necessary supply chain capabilities in order to manage risk and mitigate them in order to construct a supply chain resilience to satisfy its customers' demand. We know that in the recent 3 decades, organizations focused more on the cost and the efficiency of a supply chain without asking themselves if something may go wrong and how to mitigate disruption. Therefore, this is the very moment to understand that we need to know our supply chain. I like to remind you an ancient saying deriving from the Delphi oracles, Gnosis auton, know yourself. And this is very important because if we know ourselves, that means the organization scenario, but also the world outside our organization, we are be able to face the vulnerability and the risk that may affect our supply chain and discover the so-called weak point or the point of failure of the same. Therefore, we needed to identify where vulnerability lie, and at the same time, if our supply chain are too much China dependent. Try to predict how the pandemic will evolve, and if the occur, especially now that we see that we are suffering from a second wave of the pandemic. And also, inevitably, the supply and the demand will work in a asynchronic way. Therefore, we need to understand where our stock is located and how to cope with the decrease or the increase of demands according to the customer's requisition. And at the same time, without forgetting that we must sometimes comply with the more stringent regulation. I like to describe this situation as a necessary approach in the sense that we need to have good understanding of the importance of knowledge. We forgot that with the passing of time because we were more urged, as I said, with the cost and efficiencies of the supply chains. And now there is the time to ensure the holistic and more multi-prospective approach. Try to understand, therefore, where risk and threat lies, map the entire supply chain from the mine to the end consumer in order to know all the nodes that are part of our supply chain. And in this respect, the implementation of risk management and business continuity the principle may help us in reaching the required resilience. Let us see. We have on one side the business continuity discipline that provide what needs to be done to deal with the consequences of a disruptive event. And by implementing properly the business continuity management system, we succeed in reacting quickly to the disruption, and at the same time, we can better manage and contain it. On the other side, we have the risk management discipline that help us in identifying and measuring the probability and the severity of the event, and provide the necessary mitigation measures such as physical risk control and risk financing. Therefore, we can see these two disciplines as two faces of one coin. Because on one side, we have the enterprise risk management that provides the strategic approach, and on the other side, the business continuity management that provides the tactical approach. Therefore, we can say that they both contribute in guaranteeing an holistic approach in the sense that they are complementary, because risk management without business continuity loses a measure of mitigation of the impact resulting from a disruption. And on the other side, business continuity without risk analysis and threat analysis can work properly. Therefore, we can say that through the implementation of these two disciplines, we can have, in a transposition way, from the philosophical point of view, as in the Tao philosophy, we have the yin and the yang that guarantee the complete cycle of life. With implementing business continuity and risk management, we can guarantee the cycle of the supply chain. Then, when implementing the risk management and business continuity discipline, we need to identify which supplier to monitor, because we forgot sometimes in the recent decade that it is important to have the whole view of the supply chains. That is, that you need to know your supplier and also the supplier of your supplier, in order to discover the vulnerability, identify for this reason the risk indicator that should reflect the strategy and the objective of your organization, and carry out the relevant impact assessment in order to group the suppliers in terms of criticality and the vulnerability that may generate. Also, the business impact analysis is strategic and fundamental when managing the supply chain, since we need to inherit the key indicators of typical that of the supply chain of the business impact analysis. That is the return time objective, but also the terms of impact that your supply chain may suffer. It has the impact in terms of a financial aspect, strategic aspect, reputational aspect, legal aspect, and create in this way a general risk assessment able to guarantee a holistic approach. Therefore, in order to guarantee this holistic approach, we implement the business continuity plan that is considered as a calibrated synthesis of the enterprise risk management and the business impact analysis, in order to understand better the impact of unavailability in terms of asset, critical resources, and suppliers, and also logistic operator, and identify in this way the single point of failure. What kind of measure an organization may consider in order to proper manage global supply chains in terms of risk mitigation, business continuity, and emergency planning? We have to look at the resilience aspect, and in this respect, we need to map supplier network, not only as I anticipated before, the first, the second, and the third tier, but also consider sub-supplier in order to identify bottlenecks. Map the inventory location and where stock reside, because it's very important. I want you to provide an example. For example, during this pandemic crisis, we had Nike, the giant for sportswear apparel, that implemented prior to this critical period an app able to monitor all the stocks around the world. When the COVID-19 hit the world market scenarios, Nike was able, thanks to this application, to intercept where stocks were located and divert the stock from that were supposed to reach the retail shops to those e-commerce apps in order to provide the necessary quantity of stock to satisfy the end consumer. That was a very successful strategy because implies a reduced loss for the company in comparison with the other suppliers. And then that is also an aspect that brings another approach in terms of evaluating where the warehouses are located and the distribution networks are located, and if you need to reassess and diversify them. That means that all the players needs to collaborate and contribute all together to the resilience of the supply chain. In terms of demand, we need to ensure that you know the true cost to serve and guarantee also the granularity of data, because nowadays we have a lot of data that can be used profitably by implementing artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoTs, and as it happened with Nike, use ad hoc app that may contribute to manage better the supply chain resilience. And also, it's very fundamental to document how you behave in case of disruption, because it can be a lesson learned that you can use in the future. In terms of transportation, warehousing, and workplace, we need to reassess the trade-off between lead time and transport costs, and review also the implication of property, because maybe that with the changing of the scenario, you need to reconsider differently the location that you were using in the past, and at the same time try to assure that information systems are fully operative to support the remote working, especially now that the second wave is on. We need to guarantee that all the remote working is put into safe environment and be ready to support the supply chains. Therefore, with the changes in paradigm in managing the supply chain, we need also to invest in resources and provide ad hoc training and awareness program. Because as I used to say, that we need to consider business continuity management and enterprise risk management as important and strong lever to gain significant advantages in terms of risk prevention and reduction in incident magnitude, because they are more focused on guaranteeing the resilience of the supply chain. And because of this, when we don't succeed in mitigating risk, we need to transfer risk. And here the insurance company come into the picture, and they can also rely on these two disciplines in order to assess better the organization and verify if they put into place ad hoc business continuity management, enterprise risk management to be more resilient and provide lower insurance cost in case they prove to be resilient. I pass the word to Pascal now. Thank you.
We have a little technical issue. We will come back in a couple of seconds. Jérôme, we can probably go to the next part of the presentation, and we will go back to Pascal when he will be ready. I will give the floor to Federica, who has prepared a business case. So Federica, the floor is yours.
Okay. So here we have decided to provide you a business scenario. That is, we consider a high-end industrial printing machine manufacturer in Europe with software components sourced in China, that we know that this implies a big problem in this very contingent moment. North America as a main distribution market and facing disruption of suppliers and volatile customers' demands. The plants were obliged to shut down and a number of staff ill. So the organization needed to put in place some solution in terms of risk management and risk transfer and financing. Let us see. Normally, organizations should question themselves certain questions, such as who are the organization key players that can impact the ability to meet the customer expectation, and especially when they are not able to deliver on their commitment, and also try to identify what are the criteria for determining the level of criticality of a supplier, as we have seen, or if the classification processes of supplier has been properly established and periodically reviewed, and what we are expecting from those key suppliers during an emergency, how they react, and if we have considered to include some risk management mitigation and establish special service level agreement, and at the same time, if ad hoc proper tests were carried out to measure the resilience of our supplier and sub-supplier, and if they are able the products as per the service line level agreement. Or as per the scenario that we have just described, we have to guarantee, the company had to guarantee resilience. And the key chain, the supply chain key driver identified were the demand, obviously, the HR involved in terms of organization, personnel that was ill, and the organization need to consider how to cope with this criticality, how to manage stock if available, and how to guarantee a proper logistic approach. When the crisis was on, the organization need abruptly to align production to demand, and at the same time try to decide what cost still to consider, and to postpone also, if the case, the investment, in order to proceed in giving priority to those processes that were able to generate profits. At the same time, it was fundamental to monitor the cash flow and the working capital, and also to renegotiate, if the case, the terms of payment with respect to supplier. Try to guarantee also the continuous communication with the clients, because it's a condition sine qua non, and client, we know, is king, and we need to take a particular care of them. And also it was inevitable and urgent to map personnel and protect them and motivate them, because this crisis implied also emotional disruption. Nobody speaks very much about emotional disruption, but for example, in Italy, during these almost 9 months, we had more than 4,000 people that committed suicide because of an emotional disruption. And you have also to increase the demands and how to cope with them, and assess also in this respect the reactiveness of your supplier, in order to identify and exploit the opportunities of the very moment. After this initial phase, the company needed to assess better the scenario that were developing with the passing of time, and executed when needed the emergency plan, the continuity plan, the business continuity plan, and to monitor also more and more the suppliers, not only and first, second tier, but also in depth, considering also the sub-supplier, in order to improve its own supply chain, but also, if the case, redesign it and reinvent it, and considering the relocation of a supplier, new market, new customers, in order to comply with the critical scenario. And also, it was very important, try to exploit the the data that the company has available at the very moment, considering also the employment of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and ad hoc app able to monitor and carry out geopolitical, for example, audit, or as Nike did, try to monitor the stock available and divert it where it was needed, and consider also alternative logistic and integrate other logistic operator against, for example, an increase in demands. So what is next? What the company needs now to do in order to be more resilient and ready to face the future challenges, especially now that we are experiencing a new wave of the COVID-19. We need to diversify our supply chain in terms of a geographic area, market, supplier, logistic, consumer, and guarantee a better holistic approach by implementing risk management and business continuity principle, and guarantee the operational continuity of the organization. Consider new paradigms in order to guarantee a better, transparent, agile, and adaptive supply chain approach. Now,
moving to the polling question, I think Pascal is back with us. He faced, unfortunately, a power shortage. Server. So it looks like Switzerland is not as resilient as it used to be before. Anyway, Pascal, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, yep.
So I give you the floor for your presentation, if you don't mind, and then we will go back to the polling question and continue with the business scenario.
No problem.
Here it is. Thank you, Pascal.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So unfortunately, I apologize for the problems. It seems effectively that Jerome says Switzerland is not as resilient as possible. We just had some work and some power shortage here. So that's a good lesson, and that risk management is quite important, and we should sometimes start with ourselves when doing risk assessments. But let's try to make the link to what Frederica has explained in terms of risk assessment of general principle, and try to find the link to the insurance solution or the risk transfer issues. So basically, as Federica said in the first part of this presentation, adequate risk management practices are indeed very important when it comes to protect the companies against supply chain, or to make a supply chain resilient. So for many companies, and Jérôme said it at the very first introduction of this webinar, that most of the companies are not really prepared, or haven't been really prepared as they should have been. So there is still a lot of room of improvement, and obviously it is not quite important to just to think about business supply chain or business resilience, but to think about what could we deliver in terms of good practice when we do face such an unprecedented crisis that the one we are facing now. because for the first time, really everything and everyone have been hit more or less at the same time, and that is really something which we haven't faced before. If I look back a bit of what risk engineers or risk managers in the industry are thinking about, then the problem
Okay, so it looks like we have some issue with Pascal. That's part of the risk management, no problem. So what I propose is that we go back to the pooling question. So we will make you work for a few minutes. So we have 3 pooling questions for you, and I will move to that part right now. And then, okay, pooling question there. Here. Okay, so the 3 pooling questions are the following. So we will start with the first one, then the second, then the third. So the first one is to know if you have already undertaken supply chain mapping in order to help you understand the location of your suppliers. So that's important, as you may imagine. So you will see the question in a few seconds, and you will have, I guess, 10 to 15 seconds to give your answer. Okay, you should be able to start voting now. Yeah, starting. Okay, the pool is now almost over. So we have 2/3 of our respondents who say that yes, they have already undertaken supply chain mapping, so to understand the location of their own suppliers. And we have 1/3 who say that no, they did not yet started. So Federica, would you like to comment this statistics?
I'm very happy because it's not quite common to find that now organization already carry out, their supply chain mapping is something that I think the COVID-19 push as a reaction, because people understand that only with the visibility and the transparencies of the supply chain and all the tiers that are part of the supply chain, also in supplier, we can guarantee a resilient supply chain. And I think that this push will be further followed with the passing of time, and especially now with the second wave of COVID-19, because I think that there is an awareness by companies now and organization in general that we can't avoid knowing, because the more you know, the more aware you are of the vulnerability, the risk that may occur and hit your supply chain. So it's only a matter of transparencies, visibility, and share knowledge and collaboration among all the stakeholders, the players that are a part of the supply chain. That is the condition sine qua non for facing new challenges and new critical scenario, because it's if as that the supplier function is not the only one that needs to handle with the supply chain issues. We can't continue in managing organization by silos, but all the function, all the players, all the stakeholders needs to be involved in order to provide transparencies and visibility of the supply chain. And so I'm very happy that people and organizations are thinking about knowing more about their suppliers.
Thank you, Federica. So we have a second question for you, which is, after this crisis, so after this COVID-19 crisis, are you planning to diversify your supplier base geographically? Which means, for instance, if you were sourcing parts in China only, after this crisis, you realize that maybe it would be a good idea to be able to source also parts in Europe or in other parts of the world. So that's key in order to be resilient, but that's the question. So we want to know whether or not. So you have yes, no, or partially, meaning, for instance, you decided for some of your parts to source in different places, and for some of them, no, based on priority, for instance. So we already have one vote, which is partially. Okay, it's moving. Okay, you have 5 more seconds to vote. Okay, so the poll is over. So we have mainly partially, okay, and then we have yes at 40%, and we have no at 13%. So it means that basically after this crisis, you decided either yes or partially at almost 90% to diversify your supplier base geographically. So it means that this really had an impact. Federica, you want to make a comment on that?
And it's very interesting to see that 47% are partially considering to diversify the supplier base geographically, because, sometimes you need to understand how you want to further develop your business and where, and if it's possible. And also in terms of production, it may be that the organization is first to consider reshoring and also to diversify differently its own supplier. And so, the replies to these questions revealed that the approach to supply chain and managing the relevant risk and vulnerability can be guaranteed by adopting an ad hoc, let us say, magic potion, as I used to say in my articles. That is, we need to identify the proper element according to the information that we have at hand, and after identifying risk and vulnerability, try to put into place the best strategic approach, and also to be more risk aware of the scenario that we are going to face.
Federica. So we have a last question for you. So this question is simply, after this crisis, which we are still living, by the way, are you planning to use new technologies to improve the way you assess or mitigate risks? So just to give you an example, but it's just an example, there are some technologies that allows you to base on GPS location of your vendors in order to be able to assess the risk of flood, for instance, or geopolitical risk, or these kind of things, or maybe sometimes all the geopolitical aspects. So
Are you planning to put in place this kind of technology due to the crisis? That's the question, and you have 15 seconds to answer. Okay, a few last seconds before the results. Okay, we are good. So that's quite interesting because we have more or less half yes no, and some people who say I don't know, meaning probably they have not yet decided. So, any comments on that, Federica?
You know, with the technology, you have to be ready to adopt it. And also you need to develop a technological and digital culture within the company. And with this crisis, we know that most organizations were obliged to move to remote working. That implies also the managing of additional risks that may affect also the supply chain. But at the same time, with some emergency apps, geolocation apps, we can have a good and a strategic ally that will improve further the management of our supply chain. And that is the reason why some people are considering in using in the future more extensively or implement technological equipment to have a better control of their supply, as Nike did, or if they are not ready because they don't have much digital culture within the organization, they would avoid the use of technology. We can see in this problem also every day, especially with the track tracing app that at the governmental level, there are governments that are not ready to implement them, and on the contrary, there are more mature governments that are able to rely on this technical equipment. The same with the organization.
Thank you, Federica. So Pascal has not yet been able to join us again. So what I propose, Federica, is that I have a lot of questions for you. So we'll not review all of them, but I will start maybe with one question for you related with risk management. So the question, to make it simple, is the key success factor to an efficient risk management is integration between the business performance and the risk indicators. The question was, what is your point of view on that topic, and how do you deal with that kind of approach in order to make sure that the indicators which are used by business are aligned with the one which are used for risk management?
For sure, is the condition sine qua non that you need to identify the risk indicator that reflect the strategy of your organization and help you in achieving the objective set by the organization. So here again, I stress the fact that we need to be aware of the organization strategy. And so the top management should share the, its strategy throughout the organization. We can't risk in the risk management, excuse me the words, that the organization is not aware of the approach to risk of the organization. And I think that a further effort should be done at this very moment. Try to avoid silos as possible and make all functions work together, share knowledge, to be part of the the management of risk and vulnerability. because if, it happened to me during my consultancy experience that sometimes you need to take organization by hand and simply make them understand that without the involvement of all function, of all stakeholders, and share among them what is the policy and the strategy of the organization, you risk to have a gap between top management and the rest of the organization. That is the magic potion. Share knowledge, share information, share the risk management program, share the business continuity plans, execute them as much as possible, test them in order to be ready to face the contingencies of the moment and manage risk and vulnerability accordingly, not only in terms of supply chain, but in terms of the whole organization. I like to consider the organization as symphonic orchestra, where there are all the functions that need to know their own piece. And at the center, the business continuity and the risk manager that play as director, and they are able to convey the strengths of all function to perform harmonically in a holistic way the symphony of the organization. That is for me the secret. The involvement, the share of knowledge, the share of strategy to make all the main actors be part of the organizational symphony.
Okay, very clear. We have one more question, which is, I think, important for all of us. We have all faced recently some increase in terms of premiums, in terms of deductibles regarding our insurance coverage. So you mentioned that premiums should be correlated by being able to prove that the supply chain is resilient, which I believe is a very good idea. But the question we have from our participant is, how would you be able to prove that that this is actually being in place? Which kind of evidence could you show to your insurance company that the topic is actually under control?
For sure, it's a challenging. It's very challenging. The situation in terms of insurance covers at the very moment with the COVID-19 on. But I think that all efforts should be made also from the insurance company perspective in order to work together with the organization, because the organization can prove their resilience by implementing the two disciplines, and in insurance can assess this grade of resilience through ad hoc audit, proving that the organization is mature, implemented correctly these two principles, and design the ad hoc emergency plans, crisis management plan, disaster recovery, supply chain management process, and demonstrate it. And at the same time, what is fundamental for me, for the organization, also oblige the supplier and sub-supplier to be compliant to the supply chain requirements by the organization. And with this, synergy among risk management, business continuity, organization, and insurance company, the insurance company on their side, they will be able to assess better and verify the resilience of the organization that need to provide an insurance cover with. And if the result to be resilient, as it happens now with the bank and the mortgage, try to consider a decrease in the insurance cover cost. That is the challenge for the future for me. But also, I think that will be very strategical and fundamental to involve also the government that experienced as well in this period, in some way, the disruption, because they realized that they were not able to provide, for example, vital equipment to cope with the pandemic crisis. I hope to have answered your question.
For me, it's very clear, and I hope it's also helped the participant who asked the question. Please, for the participant, do not hesitate to ask additional questions. Just feel free. Unfortunately, we have some bad news from Pascal. They have restored the power, but the internet line is still down. So he will not be able to join us back. That's a shame, but it will. We'll have to deal with that kind of issue. That's typically a risk. So we are going to move to the end of this session. There is one slide that was supposed to be presented by Pascal, but I will show you, which is more or less, I think, the conclusion of this crisis that we are living is the fact that yes, some risks are totally announced, but they are under-evaluated and they are causing very high impact. So that's what Pascal was supposed to call the two gray rhinos. It's very unlikely to see two gray rhinos in the same place at the same time. And yes, that's exactly what happened with COVID-19. Lot of I would say bad luck and very, very high impact for all of us on the supply chain, but also on many other topics. So let's move to the conclusion. So the general conclusion of this session, that the message that we wanted to give you is quite simple. The first point that is really key in order to survive to this kind of crisis in the future is that you need to create a more resilient, transparent, flexible, agile supply chain. This is quite easy to say, but for sure we know that it's not that easy to do, especially when you have a large amount of suppliers across the world. But the resilience should be done by design, meaning when you implement a new process, when you decide to source from a new supplier, you should think about what could go wrong. And that's very key, because that's always too late when the product is already started to start, but thinking about what could be your backup plan. So you need to be agile. Next aspect is the collaboration, and we say it 3 times, collaboration and collaboration, because yes, it's key to collaborate with your suppliers. That's really, really important. Just to give you an example of my own experience at Faurecia, during the crisis, we were, I would say, lucky to face already this crisis in Wuhan area, because we have 2 plants in Wuhan, and they have been able in Wuhan to restore work quite fast. And so we took this experience for us, for the rest of the world, so especially the US and Europe. But we also shared this experience with our suppliers. So we made 2 large meetings with most of our suppliers, and they were very happy to get our own experience on that. And we believe we really helped them to cope, I would say, with this crisis. For sure, it's not a question of survival, but we believe that we help them, and for us, without them, we are nothing. So that was really key for us to help them also, and we also provide them in some cases some help in terms of liquidity, for instance. And the last aspect that also makes your supply chain more resilient is the fact that the risk management and the business continuity management culture need to be part of your organization. So whenever someone is taking a decision, even if it seems to be easy decision with no impact, people need to have in mind which risks they are taking and what could go wrong. So which action they could do in case of something goes in the wrong direction. So that's typically what we are living today with Pascal. Unfortunately, it seems that the fiber optic, which was bringing internet at his home, failed due to construction work. So it happens, and that's why typically in factories, in plants, of course, we cannot afford that at home, but in plants, we usually have 2 backup lines that we can use in case something goes wrong like this, because it's very, very low probability, but it still happens from time to time. And the second slide regarding the conclusion that we wanted to share with you with Federica and Pascal are the lesson learned. So the lesson learned are the following. So you need to try to optimize the composition of your supply chain, because we know those kind of uncertainties will happen again. So it has to be as optimized as possible. Of course, you cannot afford to have 2 or 3 backup vendors for every part of your supply chain, but you need to find the right balance between the cost and the mitigating measure. You need to try to diversify those suppliers. And what is difficult also, it has been mentioned, is the fact that yes, you have tier 1 supplier, but they have their own suppliers and so on. So having visibility on its tier 1 supplier is already a good start, but it's much better if you have visibility as well on their own suppliers, so the tier 2 and so on, which is clearly not easy, to be honest, but it's possible and it will help in case of such a crisis happen. You also need to move from a reactive mode, so waiting for bad things to happen, to a risk-aware mode, so think about what could go wrong and be prepared for that. Next point is that you need to take into account the cost of risk. So that's important because, of course, you cannot just take any decision without taking into account the cost. So it's always a balance between the cost and the decision you are going to make. And then you need to equip yourself. So equip yourself is typically the question we ask you, the third question of the pooling, which was to put in place some tools in order to help you to stay at the top of the potential threat, to identify which issue you can face. And those kind of tools really can help, especially when you have a large amount of suppliers. But of course, not all companies can afford implementing this kind of tool because usually the cost is quite high. And more or less, that's it, what we wanted to share with you. Federica, would you like to say a last word before leaving?
Something that I don't stop stressing is knowledge. Share knowledge, share information, involve people, all the actors, in order to provide a resilient organization and be ready to face the future challenges, and also by implying technology if required, without forgetting the cybersecurity risk that the technology implies. So the buzz of the word, the buzzword of the moment with respect to supply chain, but can be also extended to all the organization, is visibility, transparency, flexibility, adaptability, and agility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federica. Thanks to Pascal too, which is not with us. And thank you for all participants. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. And we will be available for the next 30 minutes to 1 hour in the dedicated place in the virtual conference. So if you have any question, we will be able to chat with you to answer to your question. So I wish you all a good afternoon and a good end of seminar. Thank you very much.
Bye.